Saturday morning streamed through the bedroom windows, illuminating the sleep of James Healy and Claire Chesterton, comfortably nestled in their elegant double bed. She rested her head on his chest while he played with her hair. "You see, you don't have to go somewhere to have a good time," James said slyly, continuing the argument from the previous evening. "Well, it looks like I was wrong," Claire reluctantly agreed. "But we can't completely close ourselves off from the world." She never knew how to leave an argument without continuing. "Maybe not, but there's something romantic about it." James smiled, not wanting to start a fight again. Claire was about to respond when the phone rang. She picked up the phone and immediately began squealing with delight, revealing her cheerful, animated nature. James watched as she became completely immersed in the conversation. "I think it was Chloe," James said dryly when Claire hung up. She always acted like this when Chloe called, like she turned into an excited schoolgirl, enjoying the pranks they could get up to together. "Yes, she wants us to go tonight to a new club that opened in the city center. There are several themed rooms, 60s, 70s, 80s. You will love it. You will be able to spend the whole evening in the 80s hall," Claire said enthusiastically. James knew there was absolutely no point in arguing now. "I, on the other hand, will spend most of my time in the 60s hall dancing, and then I think I'll relax in the 70s hall," she said, tying her dark brown hair into a ponytail as she stood up from the bed. Claire put it euphemistically, she liked mind-expanding substances, especially when she was drunk. James imagined this with horror. He hated clubs with all his soul. He found it much more pleasant to have intellectual conversations than to overcome his natural awkwardness by trying to dance. Claire was the complete opposite. She looked amazing on the dance floor. Her perfect slim figure, revealing outfit, and the self-confidence that her Latin roots gave her allowed her to completely relax and enjoy what was happening. James watched her look at herself in the mirror. Was she doing it out of pure vanity, or did she want to look good for him, her boyfriend of almost 18 months? She continued fiddling with her eyebrows while he admired her beautiful body, covered only by a light lilac t-shirt and shorts. Sometimes they were so different, but at the same time so similar. He adored her in these moments of solitude, but she also had another side, the one that longed to enjoy life, try its different fruits, and not deny herself anything. Having finished examining herself, Claire smiled at James and danced off to the shower. She was clearly excited about the upcoming evening. The day flew by and Claire went with Chloe to buy a new dress, leaving James to watch TV and follow the football results. Returning home, she approached him with a devilish gleam in her eyes. "I have something special for tonight," she whispered in his ear as he sat on the couch. "Can I take a look?" he asked, slightly aroused by the thought of her in another revealing dress. "Only later," she teased. "What if everyone else stares at you too?" "This is unfair," he objected. "This is completely honest. I'll come home with you. I'm going to change. I need to be at Chloe's at 7. With these words, she jumped out of the room. James put the can of beer he had been sipping all day on the table and thought about the upcoming evening as he sank into the sofa. The cold, nervous feeling in his chest intensified as he imagined Claire transforming from Jekyll to Hyde, with Hyde being the dance-crazy, flirty, young beauty who oozes sex appeal. And God, she was so damn sexy. She has shoulder-length hair, creamy skin, and a smooth, graceful body. Any guy would be willing to chase her in circles. James increasingly doubted whether he could cope with this. At the top, Claire was turning into Hyde from his vision. About an hour later, she tiptoed into the living room, where he was still sitting. When he saw her, he involuntarily stood up. She looked amazing. Her eyes were huge and twinkling. The tight black dress was held at the neck and a single tie at the back, exposing almost her entire back. It fell loosely in the front, revealing her shapely 34C breasts. She embodied regal femininity, and her fiery red high heels, matching her lipstick, made her as tall as James 175 centimeters. He almost couldn't stand her. "You look amazing," he exhaled, touching her slender waist. Her smile widened, and she hugged him, whispering in his ear, "I can't wait for tonight." Intoxicated by her sweet scent, James ran his hands over the bare skin of her back, and quickly noticed that she had neglected to wear a bra. His arousal grew stronger, and he felt tension begin to build in his jeans. "We can't stand like this forever. You need to get ready. We only have half an hour left to be at Chloe's," Claire commanded, breaking the hug. Disappointed, James headed to the bathroom, amazed at how attractive Claire looked. He already knew that this evening would be unforgettable. A couple of hours later, Chloe had beer and wine flowing like a river, as did laughter and jokes. Not being a big drinker, James simply listened as Claire, Chloe, and a few other friends he didn't know shared stories. His gaze kept returning to Claire and Chloe, who were sitting next to each other, carefreely showing off their bare skin. Their dresses were equally short and barely covered their buttocks. Any turn on the dance floor could provide observers with a good view, and there were many who wanted to take a look. Chloe invited two male friends who sat to the left of James. One was named Dave, the other was Carrick. James couldn't believe that someone could call himself that. The name seemed too pretentious to him. They were both large and much louder than he was, wearing tight t-shirts that showed off their gym-trained muscles. They behaved with defiant self-confidence, which frightened him a little. James wondered what this meant for his own manhood. "They're bigger than me, more extroverted, but they probably don't have the same overall intelligence as a cabbage. Why should I compare myself to them? I'm much smarter." But this thought brought little comfort. Their boorish behavior continued as James remained largely aloof from the heated conversations, stares, and advances going on in front of him. Claire, by this point, had completely turned into the person he saw in her Hyde look. Animated, wide-eyed, openly flirting with guys and laughing cheerfully with Chloe. "So who are you sleeping with now, Chloe?" Carrick asked cheekily, grinning and crossing his tree-trunk tanned arms over his chest. Chloe looked at him with a mock-shocked expression. "What do you care, thug? Do you think you have a chance?" James suddenly became interested in the conversation. He knew that Chloe was attractive. Her brown hair flowed in seductive curls over her pretty face. Her figure was more pronounced than Claire's, with large breasts, and she was known for her free morals. And of course, she was not shy. "You haven't even been with a man until you've tried muscles like mine," Carrick said, unfolding his arms and flexing his biceps. Chloe and Claire looked at each other and burst out laughing. "So, all your muscles are just as big and strong, Tarkin," Claire grinned, biting her tongue between her front teeth, as she always did when something piqued her interest. "Certainly, a stallion like me only has endurance." "Feel it," Carrick growled, holding out his bicep to Claire. She carefully touched the tense skin of his muscle, opening her mouth slightly. "Oh, what a big and strong boy," she exclaimed, feeling the heat of desire begin to rise to her cheeks as their eyes met. She knew her boyfriend was watching all this. Chloe laughed again. "Touch it, Chloe, it's really impressive." "Maybe you should start going to the gym, James." Her proposal was met only by silence and a frown from James. Claire continued to clench the muscle longer than necessary, while Carrick kept flexing his biceps for her. "Hey, you can't hold it all night. Let me touch it too," Chloe exclaimed, tipsy, leaning forward and showing off some very revealing cleavage. "Hey, do you want to touch it too, James?" Chloe teased before she and Claire burst into laughter, hinting at something James didn't understand, but which obviously amused them. The laughter continued for several minutes as James sat silently, feeling like he was being ridiculed. A feeling of shame overwhelmed him, and he began to squirm in his chair, a victim of their bullying. This was something he began to hate more and more about his girlfriend. "We're just kidding," Claire said, trying to smooth the situation over, but Chloe instantly interjected. "I don't." They burst out laughing again. Dave and Carrick looked at each other and shook their heads, smiling at the girl's mischievous behavior. "At least I don't have a name like Carrick," James muttered, barely audible, trying to maintain some modicum of dignity. Once the giggling had died down and both girls had wiped the tears of laughter from their eyes, Dave asked how they were going to get to the club. After much drunken argument and clumsy attempts, they finally called a taxi. James thought about telling them to go without him, that he'd rather go home and get some sleep to rid himself of his worries. But he knew it would upset Claire, even though every time they got to the club, he barely saw her all night. Usually, they returned home separately, and she arrived a few hours after him, already at 4 in the morning. He remembered this time because she always woke him up wanting sex. Each time it turned into an insatiable, hot session, and it always tasted like some heady cocktail of alcohol, illegal substances, cigarettes, and passion. He knew that dancing excited her, and that was what she loved most. They arrived at the club. The building looked huge. Loud music was coming from everywhere. Every available corner was filled with dancing people in a gloomy atmosphere, partially hidden by dry smoke, creating relative anonymity for everyone. James was waiting to get a ticket when his eyes caught familiar sights. People kissing on the dance floor, scantily clad girls in cages, drunkenly staggering patrons, and others openly smoking questionable substances. His pulse began to quicken, and he thought that in such a place it was better to be completely drunk than almost sober. These same images only inspired Claire and Chloe even more. They clearly couldn't wait to get inside. Having received the tickets, Claire turned to James and spoke to him quickly. "Carrick and I are going to the 60s lounge, and you're going to the 80s, right? I'll find you soon." Without waiting for an answer, she kissed James on the forehead and, taking Carrick by the hand, led him along. Claire could feel her growing arousal pulsing in the pit of her stomach at the thought of dancing erotically with Carrick in the smoke. Chloe and Dave went to a quieter 70s lounge, while James stood there, awkwardly trying to look casual. He wandered around for about half an hour before he found the 80th lounge. Loud dance remixes of 80s hits were played there, and the interior was decorated in the style of that decade. Presumably every room was made in the same way, James reasoned. He sat in the corner and watched the dancers, quietly hating everything that was happening. Little did he know that at this time his girlfriend was already in full swing on the dance floor in the 60s. Claire Chesterton gyrated her hips in seemingly impossible movements while dancing with her back to muscular Carrick Jones. He moved closer so Claire could feel his firm chest through the open neckline of her dress, his arms wrapped around her. Despite his proximity, her movements did not slow down, and her buttocks brushed against his groin again and again. Carrick's hands moved up her smooth stomach, holding her tightly against him. Claire loved to dance. The thought of her moving so confidently and attractively, surrounded by so many people, excited her every week. She felt a little nervous as she turned to face Carrick. At the same time, her skirt rose slightly, adding dynamics to her movements, and she was aware of the attention that she attracted to herself. She spun around several times, her eyes meeting Carrick's. She smiled, placing her hands on his shoulders, and continued to move to the rhythm of the music. Their dance became closer, more open, but still within the limits of what was acceptable for observers. Claire felt a slight rush of excitement at how naturally they moved together. Carrick placed his hands on her back, maintaining the rhythm of the dance, and his gaze fell on the neckline of her dress. She pretended not to notice, continuing to move, as if everything that was happening was part of the game. Now they were so close that her chest was pressed against his chest. She let out a slight moan. God, how she loved to dance. Meanwhile, Carrick's hands slowly moved down the back of her dress. He now used his strong arms to hold her close to him. A little more dancing, and his hands drifted south again, becoming more and more daring. First to the bottom of her dress, then to her thong. Claire's eyes widened at the dangerous sensation, and soon he began kneading her buttocks, placing a hand on each. She moaned again, this time loudly, right into his ear, letting him know that she approved of his actions. Claire had never gone this far before, but she had never felt so horny either. She was well aware that many could watch this sexual spectacle, among whom her boyfriend could well be. But this only spurred her movements, making her rub even harder against Carrick. Then, as if against her will, she threw her head back and looked at Carrick. The smoldering desire and mutual passion was clearly visible in their gazes, and their eyes widened to fully enjoy each other. What a handsome and strong man he is, she thought. And naturally, their lips slowly moved closer and their eyes closed. It seemed as if time had stopped. When his lips finally touched hers, she felt a warmth spread throughout her body. This moment was filled with emotions that Claire had not felt in a long time. Their eyes met, and everything around disappeared, leaving only the two of them. Claire felt both happy and guilty. How could she afford this, knowing that James, her caring boyfriend, was somewhere nearby? She tried to distract herself, but her emotions overwhelmed her. It was wrong, but at the same time inevitable. Carrick, seeing her hesitation, hugged her tightly by the shoulders, their breath mingling. She felt a shiver of awareness of their closeness. But before things could go too far, Claire felt a gentle nudge on her shoulder. This gesture seemed to bring her back to reality, making her realize that she had to make a decision. At that moment, Claire thought that she had been caught, that it was James. She turned around sharply and saw Chloe and Dave smiling. "Oh my God, what are you doing? What if James sees you, you minx?" Chloe asked in a mock-stunned tone that was hardly reproachful. Dave winked at Carrick with a smile as he wrapped his arms around Claire's waist again. Claire was breathing heavily, the fire of passion still burning in her eyes. "James isn't here, is he?" she asked excitedly. To her relief, James was dozing off in the 80s music room. Chloe took Claire's hand and led her to a quieter part of the club where they could talk. Claire immediately began to make excuses. "Oh, Chloe, you know what I am. You're too horny, that's your problem," Chloe snapped, then continued. "Look, I know you love James, but, well, you know what I think of him. I'd much rather see you with someone like Carrick, who can satisfy you. If you want. Continue with Carrick, I'll make sure James is away from the stage. Your secret will be safe with me." Claire looked her friend straight in the eyes as her passion flared again. Without further ado, they hugged and Claire returned to join Carrick on the dance floor. Chloe and Dave went to look for James. They found him almost asleep on the sofa, as they had expected. Several guys mocked him by inserting cocktail sticks into his hair. They laughed like hyenas, setting something down and immediately jumping back so that he wouldn't accidentally wake up. Chloe just grinned and decided to dance a little with Dave here to keep an eye on James. They didn't try to stop those who abused him. James was a handsome guy and smart, Chloe thought, but he certainly couldn't make Claire happy. And who knows this better than her best friend? Chloe moved differently on the dance floor than Claire, without the same unbridled energy. Claire danced like the world was going to end tomorrow, while Chloe was slower, more seductive. This gave Dave a chance to get a good look at her figure as he bobbed his head to the music, holding a bottle of beer in his hand. Meanwhile, in the 60s music room, Claire and Carrick picked up where they left off. His hands were on her buttocks again as they kissed. Claire could feel the tension in the air becoming unbearable. She knew that she would not be able to contain her emotions for long. The conversation with Carrick took on a completely different meaning, and internal conflict began to overcome common sense. She was given complete freedom of action, and the thought of taking advantage of this chance attracted her with its audacity. Awareness of the possible consequences only added urgency to what was happening. Claire broke the kiss with Carrick, breathing heavily. "Is there a place here we can go?" she asked, breathless. Carrick smiled at her with his dazzling white-toothed smile. "There are no cameras in the toilets here. At least not yet." Claire's eyes widened and her heart skipped a beat. "To the toilet? Isn't this illegal?" She became even more excited. Carrick's smile grew even wider, like rubber, and he grabbed her hand, their fingers intertwined as he led her to one of the restrooms. Claire thought she was starting to choke as they approached the men's room. She couldn't get in, could she? People will think she's a pervert. What if James finds out? How will she explain this? At the door, she was visibly shaking. Looking around, Carrick opened the door and squeezed her hand tightly, pulling her along with him. As soon as the door closed, the loud music became muted, and the clear sound of heels on the tiles of the men's room became ominously perceptible to Claire. To her left, two men were relieving themselves at urinals. One of them turned, noticed her, and started whistling and hooting. Claire, embarrassed, half hid behind Carrick, clutching his hand as if it might be torn from him. He led her to the booth, and she stepped inside, feeling her heart pounding like a boxer's. She couldn't believe how dirty she felt. In the men's room, on the verge of cheating on her boyfriend, almost paralyzed by fear and lust. Her eyes were burning with madness of desire, and she hadn't even taken any illegal substances yet. Carrick closed the door and locked it. There was no turning back now. Carrick and Claire were lost in a deep, meaningful kiss that felt the full force of their mutual attraction. Her left leg lifted slightly, as if she was trying to get closer to him, and his hands went to her waist, slightly pulling her closer. Their breaths mingled, and their hearts seemed to beat in unison, creating an atmosphere of complete unity around them. Claire pulled away for a moment to take a deep breath and, looking straight into Carrick's eyes, touched her fingers to the ties on her dress, which came undone with a gentle movement. The dress slid down gently, revealing the graceful curves of her figure, and she stepped forward, letting the material fall behind her. Her movement was so natural and graceful that Carrick could not take his eyes off, admiring her beauty. He took off his t-shirt, revealing his strong muscles, and it made Claire smile. Their gazes met, and in this moment, full of trust and warmth, there was no room for doubt or hesitation. Claire ran her hands over his chest, feeling every muscle before hugging him again, as if trying to remember every second of this moment. The room was quiet, only the barely audible sound of water in the pipes, but this silence seemed complete. Their every gesture, every smile and look said more than words could. It was a moment of pure intimacy that needed no explanation. He felt her hot breath next to him when their eyes met. Her brown eyes sparkled with uncertainty mixed with curiosity, and his voice was low and hoarse. "Come on, baby, you know it's inevitable." Carrick leaned back against the stall door, watching her with tension. She looked away, trying not to betray her internal conflict. The mention of James, her boyfriend, stung her mind, but instead of stopping, Claire felt herself drawn even more strongly to this forbidden moment. Next to him, she could not remain indifferent. It was like an obsession from which it was impossible to escape. Her hands rested on his shoulders, and she moved closer, feeling his warmth and power. The thought that James could be somewhere nearby added to the feeling of risk and strange freedom. This worried her more than she was willing to admit. Carrick leaned towards her, and their faces were very close. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this moment," he whispered, looking straight into her eyes. Claire froze, realizing that there was no turning back. Meanwhile, at the 80s gym, Chloe and Dave became infatuated with each other, kissing on the dance floor with their eyes closed. At this time, James began to come to his senses. He shook himself, causing cocktail sticks and other debris to fall into his lap. He felt it was time to go to the toilet, stood up and headed towards the men's room, barely able to see in front of him. Chloe and Dave didn't notice anything. James went into the toilet, relieved himself, and left. Outside, he glanced at his watch, a gift from Claire, 1:45. It was time to leave, but first he had to find his girlfriend. If this doesn't work out, he'll just leave. This was the most hated part of the night. Tiredness and searching for your soulmate among the dancing zombies. He couldn't understand why she should be with these people, because she was as smart as he was. They both had degrees from a reputable university. Why not do something cultural, he thought, continuing his search. James walked into the 60s hall and saw several couples kissing on the floor. He looked at them with suspicion, thinking that one of them might be Claire. "She may flirt, but she is mine," he convinced himself. James was about to leave the club when he saw Dave enter the toilet next to the bar. James rushed after him and slipped through the door before it closed. "Hey, Dave, have you seen Claire around?" In the third stall, Claire froze in fear as she heard her boyfriend's voice in the same toilet where she was kneeling in front of another man. No, dude, I didn't see her." "Try calling her on her cell phone," Dave replied in his dull, indifferent tone. "Yes, but she will never hear him." "Oh well, I'll try anyway so I can say I tried to call." Claire quickly ended her infatuation with another man and tried to rummage through her purse for her phone before it rang. It's too late. The device lit up and a message appeared on the screen. "James is calling." Time seemed to stand still. Then the phone in her hand began to vibrate. She set it to vibrate instead of ring. She looked at Carrick, holding back her laughter with a nervously shaking hand, realizing how dangerously close she had come to being discovered. Breathing heavily, she stood up and looked at Carrick, whose face had actually changed from an expression of something other than complete self-importance to one of mild concern. Claire felt his confident gaze and closeness with every cell of her body. She looked at him, considering their situation. A moment of silence passed before an idea struck her, and a small smile played on her lips. She approached cautiously, feeling the tension between them growing. Her hand slid to the edge of the fabric, gently moving it to the side. Their bodies became even closer, their breathing merged, and their hands found support on his back to maintain balance. "Well, I won't wait here for her," her boyfriend continued on the other side of the thin panel. If only he could see through the wall as his girlfriend interacted with Carrick, enjoying their meeting. "Where's Chloe?" James asked, unaware of what was happening. Claire, trying to hide her emotions, looked away. Her heart beat faster with forbidden excitement. "I think she's in the 80s room," Dave responded, drawing attention away. "80s? I thought she hated the music of that era," James replied with a hint of surprise. Claire tried to remain calm, but her emotions overwhelmed her. The proximity of the moment and the severity of her emotions forced her to hold her breath so as not to give herself away. The situation became increasingly tense as her mind struggled with her emotions. "I don't think you understand." "What was that noise?" Dave asked, interrupting the conversation. "I didn't hear anything," James said. Carrick was already tired of fiddling around. Carrick felt a strong attraction to Claire from the very beginning. He tried to ignore this feeling, but over time it became stronger. Claire smiled at him, looking down slightly shyly. "You're going too fast, slow down," she whispered in his ear, lightly touching his arm. However, Carrick was too caught up in his emotions to stop. The whole situation was heating up, as if everything around demanded a release. Voices were heard from the next office. James and Dave looked at each other, grinning. "Looks like someone is having a heated conversation in the office. Ha ha," Dave chuckled, raising an eyebrow. Carrick felt the tension reach its limit, and Claire, slightly out of breath, closed her eyes. Her breathing betrayed a storm of emotions, and she tried not to think about the fact that someone could hear their conversation. Dave and James looked at each other with wide eyes. "They better get to it," James smiled, clearly not recognizing his girlfriend's tense grunts to the muted dance music as Carrick had sex with her a few feet away. They came out of the toilets. By this time, Claire's toes had curled up in her high-heeled shoes, and she had left deep scratches on Carrick's back. "Oh my God!" she screamed. Carrick felt a surge of strong emotions, but still managed to say through clenched teeth, "Did you like it when I was around and your boyfriend didn't suspect a thing?" Claire, caught in a whirlwind of feelings, could not help screaming, "Oh, James, come back!" Her body was shaken by emotions. She felt how everything around her was losing meaning. Finally, fatigue and passion took over, and both were breathing heavily, leaning against the door, as if they had given all their strength at that moment. A thin film of sweat covered them, indicating the stress they had experienced. James had no idea what he had just told his girlfriend and Carrick, a man he didn't even know, to continue having sex with each other in the toilet. Indeed, the thought calmed and excited Claire in equal measure as she thought about it more and more. She and Carrick managed to sneak out of the toilet and meet up with Dave, Chloe, and James about 10 minutes after the illicit sex. Since Claire's lipstick had smudged while she was pleasing Carrick, she had to simply wipe it all off without being able to find her own. Luckily for her, only Chloe noticed this with a sly grin and whispered in her ear on the way home. "Why is there no lipstick, Claire? What are you trying to hide, huh?" Chloe also noticed blood stains on the back of Carrick's t-shirt from Claire's passionate touches. "I'm guessing you had quite a, passionate night, Claire," Chloe asked in the taxi. Claire just nodded with a big smile, fully aware that she had just had sex with Carrick. James looked at them both curiously. Claire realized that this would happen again and again. That night, she almost resigned herself to the idea that sooner or later she would be caught cheating on James. Later, not earlier. Monday lunchtime, Claire arranged to meet her best friend Chloe at the cafe met during her lunch break. It had been 2 days since she first cheated on her boyfriend James. Chloe knew all about this and, moreover, encouraged her. "So when are you going to tell him it's over?" Chloe asked, surprising Claire, who sat clutching multiple shopping bags in her hands. She lifted her dark sunglasses to look at her childhood friend, waiting for an answer. Claire smiled painfully as she looked at the pile of Selfridge's bags. "I see you did a great job. You didn't tell him, right?" Chloe asked sharply. "No," Claire answered sadly, looking down at her latte and stirring the last drops at the bottom of the glass with a plastic spoon. Chloe took a deep breath to speak, but Claire interrupted her. "I'm not going to tell him. I... I care about him." Her voice sounded as if she was convincing herself of this. "Then why did you cheat on him?" Chloe retorted. She never had patience for James and his withdrawn lifestyle, and she certainly wasn't going to let Claire ruin her life with him. "Because..." Claire hesitated. "Well, I didn't plan, it's just..." She fell silent again, looking up at the light ceiling and focusing on the dark spot around one of the chrome lamps. Chloe decided to put everything in its place. "Every week it's the same thing. You get drunk, go to a party and dance all night with some guy who's not your boyfriend. Every week you become bolder until you finally sleep with one of them." Claire froze like a deer in headlights as Chloe continued. "It's obvious to me that you want to have fun. You don't want the commitment that comes with being with a guy. You want to meet a new guy every week and have a blast. You're 23, you still have plenty of time to settle down." Chloe took off her designer sunglasses, tucking them away into a leather case, and Claire once again began searching for something to look at to hide her growing emotions. "I know you care about James and live with him, but you can't stay and continue to cheat on him," Chloe concluded. After these words, their eyes met. Silence. "What? Are you going to stay with him and continue to cheat?" Chloe gasped. Claire exhaled heavily, but said nothing, looking around the room again. She wondered about James and whether she really cared about him. Too often, when meeting with friends, James remained silent. In fact, that's what initially attracted her. Other guys told her everything she wanted to know within the first 5 minutes of meeting them. But James didn't reveal anything, as if he were on the other side of soundproof glass, which was probably due to his refusal to get drunk. Claire remembered the months after they met, how she bombarded him with letters and calls, trying to get him to open up. He didn't reciprocate at first, but gave her the opportunity to express himself as a friend. "I love him," she sobbed, looking thoughtfully across the table. It sounded like the first sincere comment. "You know how it happens when we are drunk. We think something, do something, make promises that we will never keep," Claire said thoughtfully. "It's not me, or at least not the best part of me." She continued, "I become destructive. I deliberately risk what is most precious just for the thrill." Her eyes filled with tears, and she bit her plump lower lip. Chloe tilted her head slightly. "And what will you do next time you get drunk?" "I'll try to control myself." "I can do it," Claire whispered confidently. "Of course it will work out. I love you, Claire, but you are a very confused person," Chloe complained. Not for a second did she believe that Claire would keep her word. She was always like this. She made frivolous promises and then broke them. No matter how sincere she showed, Chloe knew her too well. That evening, Claire returned home from work. The apartment was empty, its wooden floors echoing with every sound. She kicked off her shoes, collapsed on the sofa, pulled her smooth legs towards her, and, sighing heavily, turned on the TV. James wasn't supposed to arrive until 10. 2 weeks ago, he was interviewing for a new job, and the manager wanted to get to know him better in an informal setting. About 2 weeks earlier, James had left his stable 9-to-5 job to follow his dream of writing. He could write anything that inspired his eccentric imagination, as long as it wasn't the routine of predictable work. Claire had time to think. Even though her heart was wrenching with guilt for cheating on James, the memory of exactly how she had done it still ignited a fire of raw nerves and desire deep within her. She felt an uncontrollable heat growing around her thighs. Closing her eyes, she squeezed her legs together, trying to calm the feeling. No, she couldn't keep giving in to her impulses, she told herself. 6:30 slowly turned into 6 o'clock. She put the tea in the oven. The forbidden thoughts kept coming back, fragmented, hazy images of Carrick, how they danced, how she felt his strong biceps in front of James. 7 o'clock. His hands slid down her back, squeezing her buttocks. She took the tea out of the oven. 8 hours. Passionate kissing on the dance floor, cheating, and all this time she was picking up the remains of cold lasagna. It was so easy to put her hand between her legs to get rid of the ghosts that haunted her. But that would be too similar to another betrayal. She hadn't thought much about her forbidden act in the bathroom with Carrick since it happened. Claire believed that this was due to the fact that she had just recovered from her morning hangover. However, the more her mind cleared, the worse she felt. She glanced at her watch again. 8:30 p.m. time seemed to slow down. She couldn't bear to be in her skin. She felt dirty, unclean, as if the devil had tricked her into selling her soul, and now he was mocking her, showing her with a malicious smile. And the feeling of desire in the depths of my stomach continued to torment. She looked around the clean, modern apartment with despair. Her panties had been wet for the past 3 hours as thoughts of Carrick returned like a speeding comet. She tried to look at her manicured nails resting on her thigh, but couldn't concentrate. Subconsciously, her hand slid higher up her leg, touching herself, and this feeling became even stronger. Turning to the TV, she tried to focus on it. It lasted barely 60 seconds. She closed her eyes again. Carrick was there, they were in the club toilet, and she nervously but lustfully touched his hard, sculpted torso, kneeling down. No, you have to stop these thoughts, she protested loudly to herself. She heard James outside the toilet door calling her. She reached out to Carrick, their eyes met, and tension hung in the air. She felt her breathing getting heavier, her heart pounding in her chest, and her thoughts getting confused. She lay there trying to pull herself together. Her body, as if in response to an internal struggle, reflexively tensed, her toes curled slightly. No, she could not give in to these emotions, these impulses. Her hands seemed to have a life of their own, eager for action, while the television flashed nearby. Anxiety and doubt overwhelmed her, preventing her from understanding what she really wanted. She couldn't stand it anymore. Oh, for God's sake, she huffed in annoyance before reaching under her skirt with her left hand and pushing her lacy blue panties aside. Claire closed her eyes, letting her memories and imagination consume her completely. Her body relaxed, and her mind was carried away into sweet fantasies. Her hands instinctively sought comfort, reminding her of the closeness that had filled her life with bright colors for so long. Images of the past flashed before her mind's eye. She imagined Carrick approaching her, strong and confident. His gaze was penetrating, full of desire, and his touch was gentle and confident. Claire saw herself next to him, felt the warmth of their togetherness, remembering how every movement spoke of mutual trust and passion. Her lips whispered his name like a prayer as scenes from their past unfolded before her eyes. In her imagination, Carrick picked her up, hugged her tightly, and held her close. She heard his voice, felt the warmth of his breath on her skin. These memories overwhelmed her, bringing not only joy, but also a shadow of regret. Somewhere in the depths of my mind, the thought of James, of his kindness and care, flashed. She wondered how she could be so confused about her feelings. Claire took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. Her heart was beating faster, but she knew it was just a trick of her mind. She opened her eyes again, looked around her, and folding her hands in her lap, allowed herself to think about how to be honest with herself and others. Her thoughts flashed back to that Saturday night when she returned home to James after the affair. He expected sex, as was usual after parties, but she refused, citing the need to check her birth control. She retired to the bathroom, trying to put her thoughts and body in order. Trying to distract herself from her anxious thoughts, she lingered for a few minutes before returning to the bedroom. To her relief, James slept soundly and the night passed peacefully. At 9:45 p.m., she decided to go to bed, remembering to pick up her panties from the living room floor. However, the feeling of guilt began to wash over her in heavy, persistent waves. Maybe sleep will help calm it down, she thought. But her mind continued to be tormented by more and more painful thoughts. She loved her boyfriend. Why did she do this? As Claire undressed, she dropped her clothes right where she stood. How could she be so disgusting, getting rid of one man's traces so she could possibly accept another? How could this happen? Did she really have that little self-respect? The cold bed offered no warmth as she sank into its depths. She clutched the pillow to her chest, burying her face in it. Questions haunted her. Why was she a slave to her bodily desires? Why couldn't she stay true to James? What harm had he ever done to her? After a couple of minutes, the fabric of the pillow was wet from tears. Cold feelings of self-hatred froze her from the inside. However, the storm in her mind did not subside. She thought about James, about the memories that made them a couple. She remembered how she used to tease him about his telescope at university. More tears. He tried to hide his passion for astronomy, ashamed of it compared to those who loved noisy parties. That's when they kissed for the first time, after he reluctantly sat her down in front of the telescope and showed her his favorite spots in the sky. She often said that being in James' room was like being in a bubble that was inaccessible by normal means. Nobody called, there was no TV, only soft music, shadows, warmth, and dim lights. Often the room was littered with his notes and sketches in various stages of completion. At such moments he looked a little lost and disheveled, as if half asleep. Now she felt like she was in his bubble again, lying in their shared bed in his apartment. But instead of privileged comfort, it made her feel like a traitor, a harlot in a monastery. Around midnight, James returned home and collapsed into bed. Claire was still awake. Without raising her head from under the blanket, she laid it on his warm chest. Gradually, all the burning thoughts disappeared, and sleep descended on her. This is what her boyfriend could do for her. James couldn't help but smile when he woke up the next morning. Her hug was so tight, as if she was afraid to let him go, like a frightened little girl holding on to her father. He ran his fingers over the lightly tanned skin of her shoulder blade, enjoying how alive and tender her body felt. It radiated warmth, filling the sheets with her scent. He loved the smell, her unique musk that always attracted him. It reminded him of her large eyes, contrasting shades of black and brown. He wanted to see them now, but she stubbornly continued to press her face to his chest. He knew she was upset. Sometimes it's better not to ask, he thought. So he thought about the evening with his new boss, about how impressed Tony was with his ideas. Tony was one of those chairmen who had so much money that he could indulge every whim. He proposed the idea of publishing several novels in a monthly magazine. He had to be bold, in the spirit of the values of beat writers such as Alexander Trokai. Tony was impressed by the unusual visions that James put to paper. However, he was warned that the work would initially be poorly paid. But at least it wasn't a 9 to 5, James thought, grinning as if he had somehow cheated life out of real responsibility, at least for a while. By 9 o'clock in the morning, it became obvious that Claire had no intention of going to work. When James tried to stand up, she clung to him tighter, as if in a vice. She was clearly very upset, he thought. By 10 in the morning, she was still lying in bed after he had freed himself from her tenacious embrace. He was still not sure whether to ask what was wrong with her. Maybe she'll tell him herself if he asks how she's feeling. She didn't show up until 11. "Are you not going to work today? Are you okay?" he asked. Claire studied his face, deciding how to take his words as she leaned against the doorframe. "Yes, I'm fine. I just didn't feel well yesterday," she answered, heading to the kitchen. By regaining control of her emotions, she felt able to deal with the world on her own terms again. "Are you sure?" he asked, appearing behind her. She looked at his reflection in the window, which showed faint concern, and after a few seconds, she turned back with a smile. Hugging him by the neck, she insistently declared, "Yes, I'm fine. Maybe we can spend the day together. The weather is so good." James frowned as she hugged him. Over her shoulder, he reflected on the strange feeling that his girlfriend was insincere, hiding something. 3 weeks have passed, and the autumn palette of reds has given way to a winter blanket of gray. It was surprising to Claire, but over the past month she had practically no contact with Chloe. However, this was about to change. A week before Halloween, Chloe contacted Claire, and from the screams of delight coming from the living room, James realized that some kind of party was being organized. His face darkened as he sat at the computer, trying to finish his latest literary work. He had to send the story to the first issue of the magazine by Friday, which, incidentally, fell the day after Halloween. Things weren't going well. The usual enthusiasm with which he wrote his stories had evaporated, and he felt the pressure to produce results resulting in predictable sentences with a subject-verb-object order. Or perhaps his perfectionism was getting the better of him again. Soon Claire entered the room, circling him with the desire to tell him the good news. "We were invited to a party at Chloe's house for Halloween. It's a masquerade. You need to wear something," she said with delight. Why does partying make her so happy, he thought. And there is no way to avoid this, right? He asked, trying to evoke at least a drop of sympathy from her, looking up from the table. Claire mouthed, "None," smiling playfully. Despite her lively and cheerful appearance, she still could not cope with her inner demons. One of these demons, she was sure, pushed her to cheat on her boyfriend. And then it dawned on her. Carrick could very well be at this party. She had to talk to Chloe to make sure he wouldn't be there. The next day, Chloe and Claire went shopping for costumes. However, the search turned out to be futile. All the costumes they saw were either too tacky or too cheap to wear. Moreover, the girls seemed to be playing with each other. If one liked the costume, the other deliberately expressed dissatisfaction. While shopping, Claire decided to take a moment to ask Chloe if Carrick was coming. No, he has his own plans for this evening. He won't come, although I invited him. Do you want him to be, Claire? Chloe asked in a teasing tone. No, Claire objected, but her eyes gave her away. Don't worry, I won't tell James that you want to see the guy you slept with last month at my party, Chloe replied sarcastically. Claire shot her an angry look. In the end, the girls decided that the best way to choose costumes was to order them, so as not to change their minds later. The costumes were supposed to arrive the day before Halloween. Chloe opted for a form-fitting PVC cat costume, while Claire opted for a short, sexy witch outfit. The models in the catalog looked provocative in these outfits, which Chloe noted with pleasure. James, who had to find his own costume, decided to order one with them and chose a classic vampire outfit. Thursday came quickly. James finished the story, but was not satisfied with it. However, he submitted it, complaining that it failed to give the plot the depth he desired. The costumes arrived the night before and were with Chloe. James entered the kitchen. So what time does this party that will surpass all parties start? Claire was eating pasta while sitting on a stool. In 2 hours, she answered with her mouth full. It's time for us to get ready. What if my dress doesn't suit me? She grabbed the plate and, continuing to eat, headed to the bathroom. She brushed past James, who was looking thoughtfully out the window into the darkening night. The man looking back at him from the reflection was of average height, with dark, spiky hair and sharp, angular eyebrows. Handsome, some would say. He smiled and began talking to himself. Hi, Chloe. How are you? Is this a Catwoman costume? I always thought you were more like a cow then. James, Claire shouted from the bathroom, interrupting his thoughts out loud. Call Chloe and tell her we'll be there in 30 minutes. He sighed, took the phone heavily, and dialed the number. Claire and James arrived a little after 8 in the evening. They were greeted with 10 minutes of the standard enthusiastic greetings and first drinks before heading to the back room to change. Chloe's house was nice, except for the upstairs rooms, which were a mess. She always mentioned it, as if warning me not to go there. After the death of her wealthy father, she received a sizable inheritance, part of which was this spacious old 3-story Victorian house with high ceilings. James thought that the house was much more suited to elegance than its owner, and voiced this opinion to Claire. How dare you? She responded indignantly, putting on her dress. James was already in his vampire costume, sitting on the edge of the bed and thinking about the upcoming evening. Tights or stockings? Claire asked. He stood up and looked at the dress. Arching a little, he noticed that her pastel pink panties were perfectly visible. After thinking for a second, he chose tights. Normally, he would have preferred stockings, but after imagining how she looked drunk at a party, he decided that pantyhose were better for her self-respect. Chloe would choose stockings, Claire thought, pulling on black nylon tights. James chose to remain silent so as not to make another sarcastic remark about Chloe. Instead, he sucked on the plastic fangs, swallowing the saliva that pooled around them. Claire stood up and put on her pointed hat, looking seductive. Her eyelids were covered in thick black eyeshadow, and her lips were glistening with black lipstick. She looked like a 17-year-old goth girl as she blew James a kiss. He sighed with vampire passion through his plastic fangs. The guests were already crowding into the spacious living room, from where music was blaring. Chloe's wide social circle always surprised James. It seemed to him that the house was full of media personalities whom she had befriended or slept with in some pretentious lounge with neon lights and illegal substances. Soon James and Claire became lost in the crowd. Claire found old friends and immediately continued communicating as if they had not seen each other for just a day. There were too many people for everyone to fit in the living room, so the party quickly spread into the adjacent kitchen and then into the hallways and upper floors like a fast-spreading infection. The atmosphere became increasingly humid from the heat emanating from the many bodies in the enclosed space. 5 minutes later, James had left the crowd of partygoers for the relative peace of the kitchen and was rummaging through the cabinets for something to drink other than Budweiser, which he thought tasted like cat pee. In one of the cabinets, he found an unopened, expensive-looking bottle of port wine. It seemed like Chloe was saving it for a special occasion. He grinned, opened the bottle, and poured himself a glass, deciding that no one would know who drank it. One glass turned into 3, and soon 2/3 of the bottle stood next to his dizzy head. He began to feel quite pleased, considering it a great achievement to spend 40 minutes without interacting with anyone, in perhaps the most difficult place in the world to do so. Skipping dinner doubled the effect of alcohol. Lazily and cheerfully, he headed towards the fun in the living room, but along the way he somehow managed to get into an argument with 2 guys about whether Mary Poppins was a good lover in her heyday. Part of him enjoyed talking absolute nonsense to strangers, especially when the meaningless conversation escalated into a real confrontation. It's obviously easier to communicate with people when you're drunk, he thought. Several small conversations passed by before he, holding a glass of red wine, entered the busiest part of the party at 12:32 at night. He made eye contact with Claire, who was standing in the corner, deep in conversation with a tall guy in a skeleton costume. James noticed her and staggered towards them, narrowly avoiding collisions with several tables and people. He got there by crashing into the skeleton, who stopped talking and gave James a disdainful look. Claire watched her boyfriend for a few seconds. "Are you drunk?" she exclaimed in disbelief. James nodded his head sharply with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Yes, so what?" he blurted out. Claire rarely saw him drunk, and she did not like the aggressive nature that he showed at all. Turning to Clark, she decided to ignore James. "So, Clark, you said." "Clark," James chuckled before the man could open his mouth. Claire shot him a look of rage, but James continued. "The name is almost as bad as that other guy." "What was his name?" "Carrick." He laughed loudly. "Honestly, I feel sorry for you, buddy," James said, patting Clark on the shoulder sarcastically. As he left, his coat caught several beer bottles on the table, knocking them to the floor and breaking them. "The joke's really on you, buddy," Claire thought as she watched him stagger out of the room. Now it was up to her and Clark to clean up the mess he had unknowingly made before anyone got hurt. She crouched down to collect the pieces. "Who was this idiot?" asked the lanky Clark, holding an open garbage bag so she could put the debris in it. As he leaned over, Clark could see her cleavage. "Nobody," she replied sharply, insisting that he continue the conversation as if James were not there. Half an hour later, James was walking around the house looking for someone else to hook up with. He refilled his glass with claret as if it were fuel for his contempt. Claire was still talking to Clark, but she led him closer to the exit of the crowded room, where they hid behind a curtain of people so that James could not interfere again. From there, her heart almost stopped when she saw who had just entered. Carrick and David entered the room with intimidating confidence, each holding a bud as if it were a prized weapon. They weren't wearing suits, but were wearing regular tight t-shirts and faded jeans. Carrick sat down in a large leather chair 7-8 yards away from her, as massive and muscular as Claire vividly remembered him. Her heart sank, and it became increasingly difficult for her to concentrate on what Clark was saying. Her gaze returned again and again to Carrick's body as far as possible through the glimpses of other people. Her body began to tremble, and a fire of forbidden ideas lit up in her head. James entered the room like a blanket putting out a fire, but no less arrogant than Carrick and Dave. He looked around purposefully but drunkenly, noticeably shorter and thinner than the two bodybuilders. Claire hid behind the people, losing sight of Carrick as Clark continued to mutter about the Swiss autumn. What was Carrick doing here? Was this one of Chloe's tricks? Claire wasn't as drunk as her boyfriend, but she was tipsy enough to walk the line between self-control and impulsiveness. Carrick looked great sitting there. His tan skin and muscular body made her dizzy. She remembered how many times she had fantasized about him since their last meeting, and now he was here, the embodiment of her dreams. If she made a move, he would accept her, she was sure. A lump of anticipation stuck in my throat. Maybe Chloe was right. Maybe she really needed something that James couldn't give her. One of James' advantages was that she felt equal to him in everything, but that was something she lacked. Sometimes, perhaps most often, she wanted a man to take her, and Carrick was the ideal of masculinity. James was attracted to her mind, but Carrick was attracted to her body, and when she was drunk, Claire usually followed this insatiable physical desire. "Claire," Clark repeated, looking at her, "you seem to be hovering somewhere far away. It's time for me to leave." She smiled and looked up at the tall man, whose dark brown eyes glowed warmly. "Sorry, I was thinking about someone else." "Someone special?" Clark asked. She smiled wider. "Sort of." Before he left, she kissed him on the cheek, asking him to contact her so they could have a proper chat. Claire then headed off to find Chloe, deliberately avoiding James and Carrick. After searching in vain in the main halls and rooms, she began checking the adjacent rooms. Chloe was found 10 minutes later, flushed and sprawled on the bed in the second-floor bedroom. "What were you doing?" Claire asked with an obvious hint. "Oh, I just felt hot. And drunk. There's no one here, if that's what you're asking," Chloe stated. Claire returned to the topic that was causing her the most headache. "I just saw Carrick. Did you know he would be here?" Chloe waved her hand lazily. "I had no idea. Is Dave here too? Looks like you're in for some fun tonight." "I told you I wasn't going to do anything with Carrick," she exclaimed. "Yes, Dave is here. He is with Carrick in the main room. Are you okay?" "Yeah, I think I drank a little too much," Chloe replied. "Your mistress will return to you all in 10 minutes. Claire was about to leave the room when the bathroom door to the right of the bed opened and a handsome young man stepped out with a towel wrapped around his waist. He looked at the two brunettes. Chloe turned on the bed to look at him, and then looked at Claire and laughed her inimitable, cheerful laugh. Claire smiled at her friend, winked at her, and cast an appraising glance at the handsome blonde man. "Can I leave my purse here?" she asked, turning around halfway to the door. "Of course," Chloe replied. Claire took the bag off her shoulder and placed it on the dresser. She closed the door, casting one last admiring glance at Chloe's companion, and walked across the landing to the toilet. Her head was still spinning from the confusion of the night. Why was James acting so strange? Why did he get so drunk? What is Carrick doing here? What will she tell him if they meet? She almost didn't want to leave the bathroom because of the growing chaos downstairs. However, she was pulled out of her thoughts by a knock on the door and an impatient female voice. "How long will you be there?" Claire walked out, awkwardly walking around a woman who needed the bathroom. She had just turned towards the stairs when Carrick appeared around the corner below. His face immediately lit up with a smile when he saw her above, like a dark angel. Nervousness took over her body. What was she going to say? All thoughts disappeared from her head as Carrick began to rise. She smiled awkwardly at him, trying her best not to look into his eyes, and muttered only one thing. "Hello. I was hoping to meet you here. Are you still with this James guy?" he asked directly, closely watching the expression on her face. She pressed herself against the wall under his imposing shadow. Yes, we're still together. Her heart was beating faster. Carrick found himself on the same step, leaning against the opposite wall. "You look amazing today, Claire." She looked up at him, unable to take her eyes off his broad shoulders, covered in a thick t-shirt. "Thank you," she whispered. The longer she looked at Carrick, the more her eyes widened. She was so attracted to this man. He awakened in her a deep, animal desire that she had never felt with James. Her legs moved involuntarily, sliding against each other in her knee-high stiletto boots. "I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment at the temple," Carrick said, referring to their forbidden act in the toilets of the temple nightclub. Her mind told her that Carrick was probably saying this to all women, but her heart didn't want to listen. She gasped, "Is it true?" "Yes, of course," he insisted. Claire felt herself trust him, like a naive schoolgirl experiencing her first crush. Carrick sensed the growing tension between them and walked up the steps and stood next to her, able to look into her eyes and her cleavage. She was well aware of the view before him. He leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Can you believe we did this in the toilet?" Her cheeks flushed red. "And your boyfriend was outside." Carrick ran his hand over her forearm. She didn't stop. It seemed gentle. Her gaze slid over his sculpted square jaw, and desire began to flare up in his chest, as if the morning dew was gathering in drops. His hand stopped moving and wrapped around her slender waist, pulling her closer. Her knees began to buckle as her thigh touched his groin. She pulled away hesitantly. "What happened, Claire?" he whispered, sensing her confusion. "You were insatiable at the temple, but now you're completely quiet." "Become a free spirit again," he hissed. She looked at him curiously. "It's just, James is acting strange. He got drunk. I've never seen him so drunk, and it really pisses me off." Anger flared in her voice, but then she pulled herself together. "And now you're here to complicate things." Carrick saw the impact it had on a young girl who was attached to another. Her head was constantly bowed, hiding her dark eyes under a curtain of impenetrable black hair. He grabbed her hand, saying, "I have something suitable." After a short search, they found an empty room littered with dust and old boxes. There was no carpet on the floor, and the light bulb flickered and burned out when they tried to turn on the light. But it didn't matter. The moonlight, breaking through the curtainless windows, bathed everything in a flickering electric blue light. As Claire's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she saw Carrick rummaging through his pockets. A transparent plastic package containing mild illicit drugs appeared, which she recognized immediately. He placed it on one of the boxes and then began to look in another pocket for rolling papers and a lighter. She bit her lip, stained with black lipstick, and some of it stuck to her front teeth. "Maybe a little stronger than you're used to." Claire had smoked before, but her reactions were different. Sometimes it would relax her and make her feel sexy, but other times nothing would happen. She had never tried it, but she showed a youthful interest, thinking that the substance could calm her restless mind. Carrick lovingly rolled a cigarette. If he had a magnifying glass, he would probably have used it. Meanwhile, Claire was tormented by conflicting thoughts. She knew that James would like this room, at least if he was sober. And now she's here with Carrick. Once again, the feeling of guilt, her eternal enemy for the past month, began to fill her. It won victories when she gave in to desires, but she could also boast that she had resisted temptation more than once, even thinking about Carrick during sex with James. Carrick lit the end of the rolled-up cigarette and drew air through the folded paper, causing the smoldering tip to glow brightly. He held the smoke in his lungs for a couple of seconds and then released it as casually as he could through his nostrils. Handing the rolled cigarette to Claire, She took it with her fingertips, her black nails reflecting the moonlight. Foolishly believing that she could take a drag as deep as Carrick, she inhaled the acrid smoke that instantly filled her lungs. She coughed sharply, clutching her throat. "Oh God," she screamed, feeling the power of the substance. Her eyes watered. Carrick laughed. The room was filled with a musty smell, and the pale smoke emphasized the rays of moonlight even more. It enveloped Claire, who was sitting on one of the boxes, her legs dangling. After 10 minutes, Claire's cough began to subside, and she began to feel the effects of the substance. Her head felt light, and a dreamy feeling settled in her stomach. She had also been smiling meaninglessly at Carrick in the haze for 5 minutes. "Like?" he asked. "Yes," she answered enthusiastically. "I've never felt this way. It's just wow." She waved her hands, trying to express what she couldn't describe in words. Carrick grinned. "Wait until you try sex under this. It's electricity." She smiled at him with some shyness as she considered his words. "Is it true?" she asked weakly. This could be interesting. Carrick watched her large eyes, full of sparkle. Were they dilated out of desire for him or out of skunk? In his usual spirit, he decided that it was because of him. Half an hour later, they had smoked 2 roll-your-own cigarettes, and Claire's head was spinning from the smoky atmosphere. It seemed that every particle of smoke lightly caressed her skin, touching it. A relaxing calm washed over her, like creamy, snow-white waves, and she barely noticed Carrick approaching her. In an instant, he picked her up, and they started kissing deeply. His tongue penetrated the warmth of her mouth, intertwining with her own. Each relief curve of his tongue seemed like velvety mountains of peace, and she felt everything. Soon his hand was caressing her left breast through the fabric of her top. He fiddled and gently massaged for a while as they kissed before he reached up to her collar and grabbed it with both clenched hands. Claire's chest still tingled with a static memory of his touch. With all his strength, he suddenly tore the thin fabric right down the front, revealing her pink satin bra with a single red love heart in the center. She just sat on the box and laughed, swaying gently from side to side as her black dress hung unevenly open. Carrick threw him off her shoulders, and he fell like a defeated animal. He then grabbed her back and fastened the clasps of her strapless bra so she couldn't put it back on. He threw it on the floor behind the boxes. She giggled even more, resting her chin on his shoulder as he raked over the bare flesh of her back. "I've been dreaming about you since I met you," she whispered, leaning back, her face lit up with a small smile. Carrick smiled back and hugged her carefully, feeling their breaths merge in warmth and tenderness. She closed her eyes, enjoying the moment of intimacy, which filled the space around them with something almost magical. Their eyes met, and time seemed to stop, allowing them to forget about everything except each other. Carrick, showing less intoxication than Claire, kissed her hungrily as her black lipstick smeared. Claire could hardly even pronounce the kisses properly, her consciousness now hovering somewhere behind several frosty glasses. She broke the kiss, her slightly red eyes staring at him. "Are you going to have sex with me now?" Carrick's chest heaved with anticipation. He simply nodded. Claire sat down and settled back on the box, leaning against the old, torn wallpaper. She spread her legs as Carrick's hands accepted the invitation to explore her nylon-clad thighs. Before he could do anything, she stopped him with a look. "Wait, I need to fix my clothes," she said with a slight smile. But Carrick, as always, was determined to do things his way. He carefully took her by the waist and, trying not to disturb the delicate balance of their arrangement, sat her down on a large cardboard box. His hands, strong and sure, slid to her shoulders, where he paused to straighten the folds of her dress. Her eyes lit up from the warmth of his touch, and something inexplicable hung in the air, making her forget about time and place. "You'll ruin my outfit," she said with a slight reproach, but there was a note of fun in her voice. Carrick just grinned in response and, raising his hand, brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. "It's just a dress," he answered calmly, continuing to look for something in the pocket of his vest. Claire shifted slightly, making room to sit better on the box. Carrick, meanwhile, had taken off his vest and folded it neatly, preparing to help her up. You always find a way to make an adventure out of nothing, she said with a slight laugh. And you always forgive me for this, he answered, smiling warmly. Claire looked at him in surprise as he pulled down his pants and was left in just his shirt. She nervously ran her hand over the folds of fabric on her knees, as if wondering what the right thing to do was. Their eyes met, and he gently took her hands, helping her up from the sofa. Leaning towards her, he slowly hugged her, allowing her to feel the warmth of his body. She spread her legs wider to make it more comfortable and raised her arms to wrap her arms around his neck. Their movements became more synchronized, as if they were dancing, smoothly and carefully exploring each other. Claire laughed quietly when he whispered something in his ear and buried her face in his shoulder. The whole room was filled with a cozy feeling of closeness, and they continued to enjoy this calm, tender moment as if the whole world outside had ceased to exist. Claire hugged Carrick, feeling his warmth and strength. She pressed closer, catching the rhythm of his breathing, and felt how their movements became synchronized, like dancing to invisible music. The moonlight reflected in her eyes, and the cool night air intensified every touch. Carrick ran his hand down her back, making her shiver at the pleasant sensation. They exchanged glances that conveyed complete trust and intimacy. Her fingers slid up, burying themselves in his hair, and he closed his eyes as if listening to the silence around him. Claire laughed softly as a gust of wind ruffled her hair and snuggled into his chest. She felt his heart beating, calm, confident. Her own heart responded in unison. Together, they simply enjoyed the moment as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving only the two of them under the shining sky. The dreamy feeling in my stomach spread warmth throughout my body, filling it with unusual lightness. She glanced around the room, lingering on her slightly damaged clothes, and sighed how would she explain this to her boyfriend. My thoughts were spinning, leaving me with a mixed feeling of shame and curiosity. Carrick stepped forward as if trying to find a foothold. He gently supported her, and their eyes met. A tense silence hung in the room, broken only by their ragged breathing. At one point, he pressed her against the door to rest, lightly touching her shoulder. She lowered her eyes and tried to calm her confused thoughts, feeling his warmth next to her. The door creaked quietly as they leaned against it. Carrick looked up at Claire, as if trying to understand what she was feeling. She answered him with a timid smile, trying to maintain the remnants of her composure. The room was filled with the slight echo of their breathing, and time seemed to stand still. Carrick came closer, and their gazes met, filled with sparks of inexplicable attraction. The feeling of their closeness became almost tangible, as if the air in the room stopped moving for a moment. There was a barely audible creak behind the door, creating a tension that both frightened and stimulated their senses. Claire shuddered, pressing closer to him, as if trying to feel his warmth. She leaned her head on his shoulder, allowing herself to forget about everything for a moment. Carrick, holding her tightly, felt the beating of her heart, which echoed in his own chest. The room was filled with soft light, and it seemed that time itself had slowed down. They were connected not only by physical intimacy, but also by something deeper, invisible, and indescribable. Carrick exhaled loudly, satisfied with one of the best workouts of his life. His determination did not fade, and he, gathering all his strength, rushed forward like a rushing bull. The door creaked loudly, shaking as if under the pressure of a strong wind. Claire felt a wave of energy wash over her body, mixing with her emotions to send shivers through every nerve. Her breathing became ragged, her body completely reacting to what was happening. Hands instinctively reached out to Carrick, feeling his strength and confidence. Her mind seemed to retreat for a moment, allowing emotions and sensations to take over. The heart was beating louder than usual, and every nerve responded to the interaction with it. The sensations became more and more intense, filling her every cell. She felt on top of the world, enveloped in warmth and energy. Everything that happened between them united them into one whole, and the tension, growing with every second, reached its climax. Claire exhaled noisily, feeling a surge of incredible strength, as if a waterfall had collapsed on her, freeing her from accumulated tension. Carrick, barely able to contain himself, paused for a moment, holding Claire tightly to him. They remained close, feeling only the beating of their hearts and restoring their breathing. "You're incredible," he whispered softly, leaning into her shoulder before finally letting the moment fade into calm. For the next 10 minutes, they held each other, naked and sweaty, her breasts pressed against his chest. Their moans, clutches, and convulsive movements remained imprinted in their minds until the music from the floor below gradually began to make its way to them again. Carrick met Claire's gaze, whose face was only an inch from his own. His chest heaved. She looked exhausted, but completely satisfied. Her cheeks were bright red, and her face was covered in a light layer of sweat. And that doesn't even count the clump of Carrick's sweaty hair in her hand. "It was incredible," she exhaled. "I didn't even give you my phone number." While his girlfriend was having the most powerful sex of her life upstairs, James lost his temper and stopped annoying people downstairs. He settled into the chair where Carrick had sat a few hours earlier. Despite the noisy party around him, he slowly drifted off to sleep. He woke up abruptly the next morning at 7:30 to the heart-rending crow of a rooster from a nearby farm. My head was buzzing and my hangover weighed heavily. "What did I do last night?" he thought. Rising carefully, his mouth tasting as if he had eaten whole cow dung, he decided to look for Claire. The house looked like a battlefield. The sleeping guests lay on the sofas, muttering and drooling. Nausea rose in his throat, and swaying, he walked into the corridor, where he vomited on the wall. He immediately felt guilty for ruining Chloe's carpet, but that feeling was quickly replaced by a new wave of nausea. Staggering further, he peered into several adjoining rooms, where he found Chloe in bed with some guy, her ample breasts exposed above the edge of the blanket. James closed the door quietly. After checking almost every room in the three-story house, he finally found Claire. She was lying on her side, facing away from him, on the covers of a single bed in an almost empty room. "CLR," he groaned, holding his head like a zombie. Then, more sharply, "Claire," he shook her shoulder, and she groaned. She turned and winced, her gaze gradually focusing on his face. "We have to go, Claire," he muttered again, as if part of his brain had been removed. She tried to get up, but immediately froze, feeling the cold air on her bare chest. A chilling cold ran down her spine. Her dress was torn in half, and her bra was gone. "Let's go," he begged like a child. Claire awkwardly rolled onto her back and hurriedly straightened her skirt, trying to collect her thoughts. Her movements betrayed internal tension, but she tried to control herself. James caught a glimpse of the jagged edge of the fabric. "Hey, your skirt is torn." "I know," she interrupted, hastily straightening her clothes. "I just got caught on something," she answered with a weak smile, trying to hide her confusion. "You go out, I'll be right back. Call a taxi." She was desperately trying to figure out how to get James out of the room, so she could find something to replace the torn dress. James took his phone out of his pocket and immediately called a taxi, standing at the foot of the bed. "They'll be there in 5 minutes," he said wearily, returning the phone to the pocket of his rumpled clothes. Claire looked at him from her tense position on the bed. "I'm going to use the restroom before the taxi comes." Without waiting for an answer, she jumped up, grabbed the top of her clothes, and ran out the door to the bathroom. Her heart was pounding when she reached the toilet. James stood there, swaying, unconscious of little more than dizziness. Claire looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her face looked a little disheveled. Her lips had rubbed off her lipstick, but her eyes still sparkled with memories of the night before. She took a roll of paper and began to clean herself up, washing off the remnants of her makeup. The thought was spinning in her head that this night was one of the brightest and most passionate in her life. Carrick's name seemed to be imprinted on her mind, causing a shiver as if an electric shock ran through her skin. These feelings were unusual for her, but she decided not to plunge into thoughts while she put herself in order. The main thing is to preserve the warmth of those emotions that will stay with her for a long time. "The taxi has arrived," James announced lifelessly from the corridor. She looked in the mirror again, hastily straightening her hair with trembling hands. Her dress still hung off her shoulders, barely covering her body. I'll go to the car and tell the driver to wait, James shouted again before leaving the house. Claire walked out of the bathroom nervously, remembering that she needed to find her purse first. She vaguely remembered leaving it in Chloe's room before running into Carrick. But where exactly was this room? Holding two torn strips of her dress across her chest, she began to peer into the doors along the corridor. The last door on the second floor was successful. When she went to pick up her purse, she saw Chloe and the blonde man she had spent the whole night sleeping peacefully with. Claire quickly grabbed her bag and slipped out of the room, hearing the taxi honk impatiently. But there was still a problem with the dress. She could have held him all the way home, but it was risky, and James, despite his hangover, might have noticed. Then she came up with an idea: pins. At the bottom of her bag, she had a few safety pins, along with a pack of condoms that she still regretted not using. Opening the bag, she hastily secured the dress with pins. Now it looked torn down the center, but at least it didn't show that she wasn't wearing a bra. The irritated beeps came from outside again. She grabbed her purse and ran out of the room, her boots clattering loudly on the hallway floor. As she reached the exit, she felt a gust of wind between her legs and ran to the car, holding her dress in front so as not to give away her dark, vicious secrets. The car was about to leave when she opened the door and plopped down in the back seat. Finally, James snorted, "Let's go, buddy. I need to get back." Her racing heart began to calm down as the ride continued at its normal pace. Claire looked at herself furtively, trying to look at ease. Her outfit looked a little unkempt after a busy evening, and she noticed that the taxi driver was occasionally casting curious glances at her through the mirror. She sat straighter, crossing her legs and looking as collected as possible. Despite her outward restraint, a mixture of embarrassment and realization bubbled inside her. She had crossed the boundaries that she had once set for herself. After 10 minutes, James's snoring in the front seat told her she could probably get away with it too. Without the slightest feeling of guilt, she smiled, remembering the stormy night, and realized that she now had Carrick's phone number. Monday morning began with silence in the apartment, broken only by the noise of passing cars. James had already left for work, leaving behind a faint smell of coffee and warm toast. Claire sat on the sofa with a cup of green tea, reflecting on the events of the past weeks. She swiped her fingers across the phone screen, opening her messages. The list consisted of familiar names: James, Chloe, colleagues. But one contact in particular stood out: Carrick. She looked at his name for a long time, remembering the past night and the storm of feelings that it had caused. Her fingers slowly slid towards the delete contact button, but did not dare to press it. Maybe it was just weakness, a fleeting moment, she thought, nervously tapping her fingernail on the mug. But memories flashed inside, his gaze, his touch. Her heart beat with anxiety, mixed with guilt and excitement. The phone vibrated, interrupting her thoughts. A message from James flashed on the screen. "See you tonight. I want to discuss something important." His message suddenly brought Claire back to reality. She felt an icy feeling of guilt squeeze her chest. She knew this couldn't go on. The heavy burden of secrets was already beginning to weigh on her. "I can't live like this anymore," she whispered to herself. She dialed Chloe's number, and she answered on the second ring. "Chloe, I need to talk to someone." "Can you meet?" Claire's voice sounded tense. "Of course, friend," Chloe replied, but there was a familiar note of carefreeness in her voice. "You still think about him, right?" Claire felt her face heat up. "Yes, but it's not just that," she said. "I have to be honest with James. I can't hide it anymore." At the cafe meeting, Chloe listened to Claire without interrupting her. But at the end, when Claire finally exhaled all her thoughts, her friend just sighed. "Look, Claire, I know you think James deserves the truth, but think about this. Are you sure you want to destroy what you have? James is stable, and Carrick is just a hobby. Are you sure it's worth risking everything?" Claire didn't know what to answer. Her mind said one thing, but her heart said something completely different. That evening, when James returned home, Claire was sitting at the kitchen table. There were 2 cups of tea on the table, one of which was already cold. "James, we need to talk," she began, looking at him with eyes full of anxiety. James noticed her tension and his smile quickly faded. He sat down opposite her, trying not to show his anxiety. "Did something happen?" he asked. Claire took a deep breath. She looked at him, his kind eyes, which always supported her, his hands, which always gave her a feeling of security. And at that moment, she realized that the words she was about to say could destroy everything. "I made a mistake," she finally breathed. Her voice trembled. "I cheated on you, James." His face froze. A pause hung in the air, as if eternity divided this moment into before and after. He slowly pushed back his chair and stood up, trying to comprehend what had been said. When he asked, his voice was barely audible. Claire told everything. About the club, about Carrick, about how she was lost between passion and duty. There were tears in her eyes when she finished. But instead of bursting into anger or shouting, James just lowered his head. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because I can't lie to you anymore." "You deserve the truth, even if it destroys us," Claire replied. He was silent for a long time, then looked at her, and a mixture of pain and understanding was reflected in his eyes. "Do you think I didn't notice?" he said quietly. "I knew, but I hoped it would pass." These words broke Claire. She realized that James was fighting for the two of them, despite knowing the truth. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he added, "but I'm grateful that you told me." That night, James slept on the couch and Claire lay in the empty bed, knowing that their relationship would never be the same. She felt her heart breaking from loss. But at the same time, she knew that perhaps this was the only right step in their history. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.